It gives me great pleasure to introduce Wendy Sweet. Wendy Sweet is one of the pioneering leaders of our fitness industry. And for those of you that don't know, Wendy is at the moment completing a PhD, and the topic is midlife woman, and this is comprising of the baby boomers transitioning into menopause and post-menopausal ladies. Wendy has until 2020 to complete this PhD, but her plan, in amongst her very, very busy life, is to complete this next year. And so, Wendy, we are very excited to be hearing about this particular topic, a topic that's dear to a lot of our hearts at this current time, and it's a topic that we haven't really heard a lot of. So, Wendy, without further ado, the PT Council of New Zealand says a huge welcome to you, and thank you for bringing this topic to us. So
you're very welcome, Jean. Kia ora, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. And it's a great pleasure to do this session for the PT Council of New Zealand. As many of you know, I'm very passionate about continuing education for personal trainers. And I've only got half an hour, and for those who know me, know that I always have lots to say about a certain topic. So what I'm going to do is whiz through the slides, and perhaps if we can do questions at the end, that would work for me. How did I get to this topic? Well, I have to say that it was because menopause hit me like a ton of bricks. And menopause is obviously a critical time in a woman's life. And 3-4 years ago, I was exercising and eating well, and suddenly I was developing metabolic syndrome and a lot of inflammation. And as I've done my PhD and talked to midlife women, I've found that these are some of the stories that we don't hear about. So what I've been doing over the past few years or 3 or 4 years, is really researching everything that I can about menopause. And I was heartened when I was up in San Francisco at a fitness conference to hear that women between the ages of 45 to 60 are the fastest growing demographic to join gyms and to take on personal trainers. But one of the things that's come out of my PhD is that a lot of personal trainers don't understand menopause and don't really understand what to do with women who are experiencing quite severe symptoms that are limiting their daily kind of capability. And I was the same. I went to a personal trainer, obviously, as I was putting on weight, especially weight around my middle, which was as we know, is the high risk fat around your middle. And the trainer started to put me through high intensity training, and I was just exhausted, and it really didn't work for me. So I went up to the States and learned as much as I could about menopause, and I hope you can see this next slide I've put up. And what I learned was that with 25 million women around the Western world going into menopause in the next 5 years, it's really, really important that we understand what is going on around this topic. And I think the biggest thing that we need to understand as personal trainers is that menopause is the game changer for a lot of women, and it is the time when a lot of women develop the high-risk inflammatory type diseases around cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, hypercholesterolemia, and we now know that hormone replacement therapy, which is a high estrogen type therapy, is now implicated in breast cancer. So today is kind of a perfect storm for understanding that if we do have women who are between the ages of late 40 to their 50s, it's really important that we do understand that this is a very high-risk time for them to actually develop a lot of the problems around inflammation that will set them up for an unhealthy aging. And I think that's what I'm very, very passionate about. So let's take a wee journey down menopause lane. Menopause typically occurs around 51 years. And the term menopause means cessation of the periods, and you are post-menopause when you haven't had a regular monthly period for a year or more. Often there's a transition into menopause, which typically starts around 48, 49, 50. and this is called perimenopause or premenopause. And this is often the time that women actually develop a lot of symptoms that are quite distressing for them. And what happens with menopause, obviously, as we know, it's the time of a woman's life where she is stopping fertility, and basically the ovaries are not producing estrogen and progesterone. So both estrogen and progesterone drop down, but as we know with the female hormonal cycle, the pituitary gland is where the follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone come from, and in menopause those two hormones are still prevalent, and so follicle stimulating hormone is still encouraging the ovaries to produce estrogen, but the ovaries haven't got the capacity to do that. So what we see is for some women, they have this huge drop in estrogen production, and you can see there on my slide that this can decreases from production about 250 to 300 micrograms a day, right down to 20 micrograms a day. Now, because hormones work opposing to each other, the other hormone that's affected is progesterone, and for some women they have very high levels of progesterone, and what happens is there's quite a gap between the levels of progesterone and the levels of estrogen, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. So what we see is a real disparity in the two hormones of the female reproductive cycle, estrogen and progesterone. And so what happens with a lot of women who have, for some reason, have got this huge drop in estrogen production, the symptoms can be debilitating. And I love this slide, but I'm a little bit concerned that the 7 dwarfs are typically male, so I don't really know that it's the most appropriate slide for us. But the symptoms of menopause are anywhere from, depressive symptoms through to anxiety, through to irritability, but the main ones are around hot flushes, night sweats, and interrupted sleep, which, as we all know, is pretty debilitating for trying to do exercise. There's a huge list of symptoms of menopause, and sometimes women go to the doctor because for these symptoms, and what happens is that the doctors, they might have one symptom that's more prevalent than others. For example, hot flushes and night sweats. Research shows that over 80% of women suffer from hot flushes and night sweats. And what are hot flushes? Hot flush is a disparity between your heat regulating centre in the brain and the regulation of the thyroid gland. So when you actually go into, hot flushes 101, you actually understand that the actual flush that women experience are due to having some sort of trigger which impacts on their thyroid and their adrenals. The night sweats, obviously, as the body sweats to try and cool down. So sometimes women experience quite severe night sweats, but it's the body trying to cool down, because at night, I'll go into the whole hormonal system shortly, but it's at night that the temperature regulating mechanism and thyroid is doing its work to actually to heat up the body and keep it at a certain temperature during the night. So a lot of women are experiencing these night sweats, which can then keep them awake, and of course they have no energy during the day. The other thing that's quite prevalent in menopause is aches and pains and inflamed joints, and sometimes this gets misdiagnosed for fibromyalgia, and certainly that's a sign of an inflammatory response in the body. The other thing that happens, which is reported in the literature, is that women also experience cardiac arrhythmias, and cardiac arrhythmias are absolutely critical for one of the diagnoses for women in terms of how they are accumulating inflammation during menopause. And we can explore, I'm going to explore why cardiac arrhythmias happen. Certainly diaphragmatic weight gain. Obviously, the thing about weight gain and the weight gain that occurs under the breast and around the diaphragm, the weight gain that occurs there is because of the drop in estrogen, but it's not the drop in estrogen that causes the fat gain, it's the effect of the drop in estrogen on the thyroid. So some women become hypothyroid, that's low thyroid, and what happens there is that their metabolism changes and they start to accumulate weight around that particular area, and obviously sleep as well. So not everyone's experience is the same, and I think that that's the critical thing to remember. Some women have, I've typically with my research I find that some women are naturally thin and they may have experienced more hot flushes and night sweats and aches and pains, whereas women who are typically overweight, and I'm going to talk about estrogen dominance in a moment, but women who typically put on weight easily and have done most of their life, they are the ones that start to accumulate the cardiac risk with the weight gain. The thinner women accumulate the osteoporosis risk. So it really depends on what's going on. So let's have a little look at the implications of low estrogen and what happens when estrogen is low. Estrogen as a hormone, if we think about what hormones do in the body, the estrogen, low estrogen, or what estrogen does in the body, not only does it regulate the woman's hormonal cycle, but estrogen helps to make hormones. And what happens is estrogen is implicated in making other hormones, as well as implicated in the role of cholesterol in the body. And what happens when women start to put on weight, and increasingly with their diet, they start to actually increase the amount of cholesterol that is manufactured by the liver. Now that's implicated by estrogen. Estrogen has a role in women in keeping cholesterol low. So what happens is that the liver doesn't tend to do its job very well, and with the low estrogen, what happens is that cholesterol starts to, especially the low density lipoprotein, starts to leak out of the liver and into the bloodstream. So hundreds and hundreds of women are diagnosed with high cholesterol and high blood pressure and are often put on statins in midlife. In fact, midlife is the most prevalent time that women are put on antihypertensives and anti-cholesterol treatment. But if you think about the fact that cholesterol helps to make estrogen and helps to make all the other hormones, it makes sense that the liver is pumping out cholesterol, but there's just not the estrogen available to be able to do that. So what happens is that women who have got low estrogen typically then start to put on weight, and they then start to get into that pre-diabetic, insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome state, and that's the time that they're actually accumulating risk for heart disease. The other risk is osteoporosis, which is brittle bones, and what we know is that low estrogen, exacerbated by low vitamin D levels, starts to impact for some reason on the strength of the bones. And if vitamin D levels are low in women, then that's when they're going to accumulate osteoporosis. Now the critical thing here, and listen up with this one, because low vitamin D is worsened in menopause despite women being out in the sun, because estrogen plays a role in activating vitamin D production from melanin. So melanin, when the sun hits the skin, it converts, melanin is released, and it's the presence of melanin in the body that helps to make the precursor of vitamin D. Well, estrogen is impacted in that. So it's a time of women's life when it's actually, if you go further, if you investigate even further, the osteoporosis risk is not only if they've got low vitamin D and low muscle mass, but it's because of this whole mechanism that's going on around vitamin D. And I'm going to talk about vitamin D a little bit more, because the other thing about low vitamin D is that it impacts on serotonin, and of course serotonin is your feel-good hormone. And the other thing that serotonin does is that it plays an absolutely critical part in heat regulation of the body. So you can see if a woman is low vitamin D, not only is it messing up her risk for osteoporosis, but it's also impacting on heat regulation through the thyroid, and therefore low vitamin D women experience more hot flushes and more muscle and joint pain. So getting vitamin D levels done in your woman a menopausal woman is absolutely critical. Here's a blood file. I've been working with a number of females now, some in Australia and some here, and this was a blood profile of a female a couple of years ago who was 52, and her total cholesterol was up to 7, and the doctor wanted to put her on statins to decrease her cholesterol. But as I said before, the reason that cholesterol, the liver's pumping out cholesterol, is that it's not, the liver isn't doing its job and it's not turning it over. And if you have a look at the fact that her triglycerides are really low, and the heart disease risk was around triglyceride, I haven't got up here her C-reactive protein, and C-reactive protein is your inflammatory marker, and it's one that doctors typically don't do, but her C-reactive protein was low. But look at the ferritin. Her ferritin was low as well. Now this lady was having palpitations, and when the personal trainer, she was training with a personal trainer, and when the personal trainer was training her, she was getting quite breathless and quite exhausted. This was a lady over in Tauranga who was working with a personal trainer over there, and the personal trainer sent me her bloods. And this ferritin, so ferritin was really low. Now, as you know, just to give you a reminder, ferritin is your stored iron. And when ferritin is low, it affects the adrenal glands. Remember, the body's always trying to work in homeostasis, so all of the hormones work together to do something around metabolism in the body. So ferritin is absolutely critical. The ferritin should, there's the range there, 20 to 200. If you look at the bell curve, that should be round about 90 to 100. So this woman here had developed anemia, and when you explored further, she was getting quite severe symptoms at 52 years, but the low ferritin mimicked some of the problems with her adrenal glands and also hypothyroidism. So she had increased heart rate, she had palpitations, lots of fatigue, particularly not recovering between personal training sessions, and her personal trainer was doing high intensity training with her because of the weight management, whereas that was the last thing she needed with that low ferritin. So really important to understand that when ferritin is low, you're not going to get the recovery in clients, and if ferritin is low, you need to explore gut problems and irritable bowel syndrome, because it means that ferritin isn't being absorbed in the small intestine for some reason or other. So that's really, really important to look at the bloods. So that's a typical blood profile of someone who has got high cholesterol, high low density lipoprotein cholesterol, but the HDL is actually really good. Triglycerides aren't high, and the ratio is absolutely fine. So this actually isn't a cardiac risk profile. It's actually a profile that shows some immune problems and definitely thyroid problems through there. And as I say, I haven't put up C-reactive protein because that's the inflammatory marker. So my message, and I know I haven't got long, and I'm racing through this, but when you're looking at menopause, you cannot look at anything in isolation. when you're looking at hormonal health, you need to understand that all of the glands work together. As I said before, the body is trying to maintain homeostasis. So when one hormone is down, another one is up. Now with menopause, obviously with estrogen dropping off, as well as a bit of progesterone, there's going to be hormonal chaos around the thyroid, around the adrenal glands, and definitely, well, sometimes for some women, also around the pituitary gland and serotonin and some of the and dopamine and some of the feel-good hormones. Now, the thing here is that we have to remember is that some women who are typically overweight and have put on a lot of fat over their fertile lifetime, so from puberty right through to menopause, if you have a talk to those women, and if they typically have put on fat around their gut, and they're typically put on fat easily, they're probably estrogen dominant. Now, I wish I'd known about estrogen dominant 20 years ago, but estrogen dominance is a term that's been around kind of, hormonal health discussions for probably about 15 years now. Now, the thing about the sex hormones, male or female, is that depending on our genetics, we secrete a certain amount of our sex hormones, and that is genetically determined. Some women, particularly those who've got a history of premenstrual syndrome, problems with polycystic ovarian syndrome, or problems with, quite severe symptoms of PMS, they are probably estrogen dominant. And what that means is that they hold estrogen in their fat cells. And so therefore the women who are putting on a lot of weight in menopause, and you start to talk about their past and their body type, and you find that they've been challenged with weight for years, particularly around their abdominal region, they are probably estrogen dominant, which means that they don't need hormone replacement therapy. And hormone replacement therapy is high in estrogen, and sometimes women get put on HRT and their symptoms become worse. So just check it, just be very clear about that. For estrogen dominant women who produce a lot of estrogen, they put on weight easily, and they typically in the past have had endometriosis or polycystic ovarian syndrome or quite severe premenstrual syndrome. So you need to have a chat with them about that. You need to then look at liver function, because the liver and the gut health is critical for clearing estrogen from the body. So therefore, we're going to talk about nutrition shortly. So just make a wee note about estrogen dominance and do some further reading around that. I've got an article on it. If anyone wants it, you can email me. So hormonal control in menopause. Menopause is the catalyst for inflammation for many, many, many women, plus exhaustion. When you're working with menopausal women, depending on their symptoms, you need to focus on these 4 hormones. You cannot manage menopause without looking at the role of insulin, particularly if they've put on a lot of weight, and they need to really think about their diet and the insulin response. Insulin or sugar is an absolute trigger for hot flushes, because when women have sugar or processed carbohydrates or high glycemic carbohydrates, they're going to get that insulin response. Insulin then impacts on the thyroid, and it's the thyroid that triggers the hot flushes. So things like if women are having hot flushes at night, they're not allowed any sugar from about 3 hours before they go to bed. So managing insulin response is critical, particularly if they've got metabolic syndrome. The adrenals are implicated in menopause because, again, of the impact that estrogen has on the adrenal glands and the thyroid gland. So relaxation is really important. Pilates, yoga, those kinds of classes, and and also relaxation therapy. Massage is really good as well. So managing adrenaline, and obviously looking at cortisol levels. Now, cortisol levels change according, depending on the time of day, but cortisol is impacted by sleep. And when women can't sleep, their cortisol levels go absolutely skyrocketing. So you need to look at their sleep habits, and you need to understand that these women who are going to bed late, using computers, watching television, they're in front of bright light, and if you've got too much bright light at night, that's going to affect your melatonin production. And so the melatonin, if you're switching on melatonin late, or bright light switches off melatonin. So if you want to help women control their sleep patterns and allow them to get more sleep, you need to get them away from bright light in the evening. In fact, Google Health have now got glasses that they put out which gets rid of the blue light from computer screens and everything, and televisions and things. The melatonin production is critical, and to switch off melatonin, they need to get up in the morning and get bright light onto their retina. If you look at the diurnal rhythm, and if you look at the night-day cycles, it's bright light that you need to have first thing in the morning on waking up, and for 10 to 15 minutes, and that switches off melatonin production. And as you can appreciate, busy woman, and I've been in this situation too, we work late at night when the house is quiet, and you're sitting in front of computer screens, you're watching a little bit of television, you've got bright lights on in the house or in the bedroom, you've got a reading light beside your bed. That's impacting on melatonin production, and that's going to affect your sleep cycle. So there's been quite a lot of research done around that. And then for some women who are estrogen dominant, they don't need hormone replacement therapy, but there are some progesterone creams. The best one you import from the UK, from Wellsprings, and they need progesterone cream, which will help to mitigate some of the hot flushes. Estrogen, I'll just talk about the insulin response, but just, the thing about insulin response, as I said before, is that it exacerbates hot flushes when women have too many sugary foods and too many carbs, and this includes wine at night. So you have to do something about trying to get them off wine at night, which a lot of women enjoy at the end of the day. Because what happens with those women who put on weight easily, they're heading down that slippery slope towards insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome. The focus for women who put on a lot of fat around their midriff with menopause is cleaning out their liver. So they need to be on an anti-inflammatory diet, lots of plants, no dairy, no wheat, and only a little bit of red meat. So diet, I'll talk about diet. I've just mentioned sleep. But sleep is critical to understand, and they need to focus on managing their sleep cycles. Hormone replacement therapy. If you want to know more about hormone replacement therapy, there's been a lot of, since 2002, 2003, the Women's Health Initiative in the United States have stopped their research because they now see that there's a link between hormone replacement therapy and inflammation. And for some women with a genetic tendency, there is that risk for breast cancer. But the other thing that they don't tell you about HRT is that it causes changes in the liver function tests. And some women end up with an inflamed liver, and then have to go on other medications for their inflamed liver, but it's actually because of the inflammation that's occurring with hormone replacement therapy. For estrogen dominant women, they don't need HRT. What they need is a little bit of progesterone cream. The drug companies, with this finding around HRT, the drug companies are all trying to develop plant-based hormones now, because the previous HRT was made from synthetic hormones, which are from horse urine, believe it or not. So a lot of women in midlife around menopause are in metabolic chaos because of their different hormones. Really important to do bloods, really important to see what their iron is, what their vitamin D is, what their thyroid hormones are doing, and what else is going on. In fact, if I was personal training woman, that would be the first thing I would do before I even touch them, and just obviously see what symptoms they're experiencing as well. With menopause, nutrition overrides exercise. So just remember that they have to change their nutrition. And everything now around anti-aging medicine is about getting rid of inflammation. We're the guinea pigs. Women in their 50s are the guinea pigs for the contraceptive pill, which has mucked up their hormones. They're the guinea pigs for sugar. They're the guinea pigs for processed food. And they're the guinea pigs for very busy lifestyles where they're still working and still have children at home and got a lot of things on. So it's really important to understand nutrition. And you can do your own work around this, but anti-inflammatory diets are critical now as part of active aging or the mitigating some of the diseases around older age. And if we can get onto it now with women in their 50s, and men as well, particularly those men who've got poor liver function, they need to start having an anti-inflammatory diet. And what you're focusing on first is you're focusing on the inside, the invisible. You're trying to turn the health of the gut wall around. You're trying to turn the cells of the liver around and trying to get these women onto an organic plant-based diet with a bit of fish mainly. So getting away from the typical New Zealand diet, high meat, high dairy, high bread, and just really getting high nutrients in. Some women won't, if they've got poor gut health, they won't tolerate huge amounts of fibre. They won't tolerate onions. They won't tolerate cabbage. So you really have to work with them to see what they can tolerate. So you need to really think about what's going on with their low GI foods and whether they've got a carbohydrate sensitivity to some carbohydrates. For example, they might be better on kumara or they might be okay on an organic brown rice. Have a look at the Diogenes diet. It's the Mediterranean diet, and that's come out of the Diogenes study. For reducing high blood pressure and heart disease risk, you've got to get them off dairy. Now, the thing about dairy, and yes, we live in the land of dairy, and we all think that dairy is good for us, particularly for calcium. It's not good for menopausal women because it's high in sugar, lactose. Anything with OSE has sugar in it. And if you've got, remember that dairy in the small intestine inhibits the absorption of ferritin. So you need to, really explore how you can get your clients off dairy, and just really think about other things around high fibre and a plant-based diet. There's some really good books out there on menopause, particularly from Dr. Sandra Cabo in Australia. I've run out of time. This is my last slide. So, my message for health, hormones and happiness, and I say that because you need to focus on health first and hormones, and if you do that, then the happiness will come, and that's helping to mitigate the symptoms of menopause. You need to understand that all of the hormones work together. You need to understand that women who put on weight easily in menopause, they're the ones that are typically estrogen dominant, so they absolutely need to change their diet. I've got that picture of milk there for calcium, but you can remove that. They can have a little bit of cheese, particularly an organic low-fat cheese, but really they need lots and lots and lots of greens and mainly a fish and plant-based diet. So so that's my message for women in menopause. It's a very complex time for women, and you have to look at the big picture. You have to not just look at exercise, and for some women who've got really bad symptoms and they're not sleeping properly, then you need to also back off too much cardio, because that will send their adrenals into overdrive and that'll change their cortisol levels. So be careful of all the cardio. Get them on weight training, light resistance training, get them on yoga, Pilates, those types of exercise, but really work with them on their nutrition and really understand what's going on with their blood work. So that's my messages there. Thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed that. I know that it's certainly, I usually present this in about 2 hours and go into a lot more depth. So I've just given you a little bit of a snapshot, but please feel free to email me if you need more information.
Oh, Wendy, look, thank you so much. That information was incredibly useful. I do have some questions for you. And, of course, people who need to leave they can get access to the recording of this later, so that's no problem. We can relax. We've got a little bit more time. But I'll run you through a few questions, and if anybody out there does have a question, you can type it into the questions section on the GoToWebinar control panel that's on your screen. So that's how you can send your questions through. In the meantime, I'll work backwards. What was the doctor's name again of that book that you mentioned?
Oh, Dr. Sandra Cabot, C-A-B-O-T.
Oh, she did the liver one, didn't she?
Yeah, and she's done a lot of work around menopause. Right, she's from Australia. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. The next question was, when talking about the creams that you mentioned, this might be a silly question, but are they just used on the skin?
Yes, they are. The best hormone replacement therapies are best absorbed through the skin. So Wellsprings was the website in the UK, and they have a fantastic progesterone cream. Now, one of the things that you'll find with menopause is that some things work for a little while and others don't. So there's a lot of homeopathics and a lot of things, but what I say, and I found this myself, don't go buying too many supplements and things until you've sorted out the bulk of your nutrition. So for women who are estrogen dominant, they need to clean out their liver and they need to change their diet, and go on, say, just a progesterone cream.
Great. Ainsley, by the way, says thank you. That was awesome. Thanks, Ainsley. And two more questions I've got here at the moment. Can you give us the title of your article that you mentioned, and do you have a website?
No, I'm just developing a website at the moment. It's going to be called My Menopause Transformation, and so that'll be going. We're looking for trial clients in the next couple of months, and that'll be going live next year. I've written a number of articles as content for my website, and the one I referred to in this talk was estrogen dominance.
Okay, and so do you want to run us through your email address, Wendy?
Oh, wsweet@extra.co.nz.
Great, thanks.
I've also there's another article about hot flushes if anyone wants it.
Oh, great. Okay, that sorry, the email address one more time.
wsweet@extra.co.nz.
Great. What we can do is if you let Jean know your website when it's up and running, then she can inform everyone as well. And the final question I've got for you here is, do you recommend that women have blood tests to see what their different levels are?
Yes, but it's all very well doing blood tests, but you have to be able to interpret them. So what you start with the basics, and often doctors don't like to do these too many tests, and certainly for vitamin D, women have to pay. So first and foremost, women have to be prepared to pay for a few tests that aren't part of the government subsidy, but you definitely need to find out their thyroid level, their thyroid function, and that includes T3 and T4. And then you need to do the inflammatory marker, which is called C-reactive protein. Ferritin is the stored iron, but then also to do serum iron as well in saturation. So I would be looking at the C-reactive protein for inflammation. I'd be looking at cholesterol, the different cholesterol tests. I'd be looking at liver function to see if they've got a fatty liver, and I'd be looking at definitely the ferritin. And the one I would add on that you have to pay for is vitamin D. Unfortunately, we don't have yet in New Zealand, we don't have the saliva tests that they've got in America at the moment. America's really moving ahead in this space, and unfortunately, we still have to pay a lot for blood tests here and in Australia.
Oh, look, Wendy, amazing information. Thank you so much for your time. You've been really generous, and I know you've got so much to say, and you did really well to condense that into a short period of time. So thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And please, if anyone's listening, please just send me an email if you'd like some more information.
Awesome, that's great. And again, Jean will let you all know as well once your website's up and running. I have got a couple of things in closing just to let you know there are a few other resources available for you to help improve the success of your fitness business. One of them is on the screen there. It's called the Fitness Business Podcast. And again, this is an active management initiative. Every month we have a fitness business podcast and we talk to experts in the field of fitness business to help you get more success. So you can subscribe to that podcast. It's free, and you can do that by searching for the Fitness Business Podcast on iTunes or going to that website there, fitnessbusinesspodcast.com. And every Friday you can actually get the show notes as well from that. So that's one resource to help you get even more successful in your business. The other one that's coming up is the most unique PT business training program in Australia and New Zealand. Now, this one's ideal for PT business owners and PT managers. We'll cover things like consumer trends, how to build the ideal customer, sales skills with Steve Jensen. We've got social media expert from Canada, that's Amanda Vogel. In the session, you'll build 2 Facebook ads. You'll learn how to make the website more engaging. There's also a very special surprise. You can find out more or register to attend again on the Active Management website. And in conclusion, we always ask you guys to think about putting into practice the stuff that you've learned today. So all the information that Wendy's handed to you today, have a think about what you can actually do in your business to implement what you've learned. So think about what you can do today on day 1. Think about what you can do on day 10, day 20, and day 30. Listening to these podcasts and these webinars is one thing, but actually putting it into practice makes all the difference. So that's our Just Do It challenge for you. Again, Wendy, thank you so much for your time. Apologies for the technical hitch at the start. But for now, I wish everybody a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much for coming.